Join our conversation as we talk today with Lloyd Metzger of Valley Queen Cheese Plant in Millbank, South Dakota. And Lloyd, I want to let folks know how I found you as a guest today, and that's because I saw you on the History Channel. You want to start there, how you wound up on the History Channel?
Well, prior to joining Valley Queen, I was actually a professor at SDSU and spent 13 years there, and then did a lot of research on cheese manufacturing, especially processed cheese. So I got contacted to be on a show called Foods That Built America to talk about processed cheese manufacture and how that product is made.
And this was related to like Kraft macaroni and cheese, the blue box, right?
Exactly.
Okay, as a dairy farmer's daughter, I gotta ask, is that real cheese or do we only consider the cheese in the refrigerated case real cheese?
Well, a percentage of it is real cheese. So when you talk about cheese, there's a category called natural cheese and a category called processed cheese. Natural cheese is a cheese that effectively is still alive because we have organisms in there that we use when we manufacture the cheese that are still present. When we make a pasteurized processed cheese, we're actually giving it a heat treatment. And that's a product like Velveeta. It has a much longer storage period. You can even store that product at room temperature in some cases. So two categories, natural and processed.
Okay. And at Valley Queen Dairy Cheese Plant, do you specialize in the natural cheese by chance?
We specialize in the natural cheese. We produce a little bit over 500,000 pounds of cheese each day. So more than 5 million pounds of milk come into the plant every day. And we process that into cheese as well as a few other products.
How far out are you getting the milk from to bring in that much milk daily?
Believe it or not, no more than 90 miles, and we only have 42 farms that provide all that milk.
Wow. Really?
Are you kidding?
No,
Wow.
so,
Sorry, that was out loud.
but it, sustainability is a big word that you hear now, and a really efficient way to process milk into cheese is to have a production facility that's very close to the farms that produce it. Milk is more than 85% water, so moving that water around is very expensive. And a lot of your costs relate to moving that water around. So it's very important to try to be as close to the processing facility as you can. Cheese making is really a concentration process. So for every 10 pounds of milk you start with, you end up with 1 pound of cheese. So the quicker you can get that liquid milk converted into cheese, and then you want to ship cheese further distances. So our cheese primarily ends up going primarily into Wisconsin, and in that area is where a lot of the cheese converters are, and converters take the cheese and cut it down into slices, shreds, chunks, different sizes of material. Believe it or not, the smallest unit of cheese we make weighs just under 700 pounds. So our blocks of cheese are a couple feet wide, just about 3 feet high, and about 2 feet in length.
So are you telling me
Okay,
that Wisconsin cheese comes from your plant?
Correct, of course.
And by the way, a 700-pound block of cheese, might get me through a year, Lloyd. I'll take one.
Okay. Yeah, I have friends all the time that ask for cheese if I could get them some, and I'm like, yeah, as long as you'll take it 700 pounds at a time. But in fact, we do have a cheese store on Main Street where we will sell 1 pound blocks in Millbank. So you will not see our name, Valley Queen Cheese, in the grocery store. But I can guarantee that if you shop at Walmart, or if you shop at a Kroger store, or if you shop at Target, or if you've had a breakfast sandwich at Starbucks, or if you've had an Arby's prime rib cheesesteak sandwich, you've had cheese from Valley Queen.
So this cheese that you're mass producing and you're sending it out, like you said, your name isn't on it. You sell these 700-pound blocks of cheese. This other place cuts it up and then they throw their name on the label and sell it?
Their name or a variety of names. So we will sell to different converters that have different customers that will either everything from Walmart brand to almost any other brand you can name, including, for example, something like a Kraft.
And what's the furthest away, Lloyd, that you guys ship your cheese?
Some of it goes south into Missouri, some to Minnesota, but primarily going to Wisconsin, a little bit into Michigan as well.
So it's mainly
That's where it initially
Midwest.
goes and and then gets converted, and virtually all that cheese ends up on the East Coast primarily through Chicago and then off to the East Coast.
Interesting.
Again, you have all that water and milk. You're trying to get that water removed and have a much more dense product. And then once you cut it and slices it and package it, again, your transportation costs get bigger because you have more packaging involved at that point.
Right. And what kind of cheeses are you guys making?
We'll make over 20 different varieties. One of our most popular is actually a Gouda. We make 1 day's worth or so, almost 500,000 pounds of Gouda every week. But primarily American style. So cheddar, Kobe, Monterey Jack, Pepper Jack, the normal ones that you're used to. We also make versions of our cheese that have less fat in, as well as versions that have extra fat in them. So you've kind of seen the market spread apart based on fat contents of cheese as well.
What about any of those like really long aged cheeses? Do you do any of those, or is that something a little different?
We are developing an aged cheddar right now, actually. So have just started an expansion. So in January of 2025, we'll actually be processing over 8 million pounds of milk a day instead of 5 million. So we're in the process of a pretty big expansion. So we'll make almost 900,000 pounds of cheese a day when we have our expansion done in January. A lot of that volume we're hoping to build into an aged cheddar program. So if you've had cheddar sharp or extra sharp that you see around, we're trying to get into that market. So,
and Lloyd, is yours one of the biggest cheese plants in the country? I mean, that's just an enormous amount.
To be an efficient cheese manufacturer now, a lot of the sites will process 8 million pounds of milk a day. There are sites that process over 14 million pounds of milk a day.
Wow.
What's really unique about Valley Queen is we are still a privately held dairy company. So we're one of the largest privately held dairy companies. We're founded in 1929, so 93 years old, and still privately held is just a really unique situation to be in.
Oh, and we're speaking
I am
with
so blown away, Lloyd. This is amazing. Yeah, and as Justin's saying, this is Lloyd Metzger. He's with Valley Queen Dairy out of Millbank, South Dakota. Lloyd, this is phenomenal, the amount of information. All of us are just in awe about the amount of milk that comes in and how many pounds of cheese you process daily. After we have a chance to check in on some commercials, we're going to come back and we want to visit more with you about what you do at Valley Queen. Personally speaking, I want to know how many trucks a day bring in that many millions of gallons of milk. So stay tuned, folks.
And welcome back to Weather and Ag in Focus. We want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. Our special guest today, Lloyd Metzger with Valley Queen Cheese Plant down in Millbank, South Dakota. And Lloyd, thank you again for joining us. During our break, we had one of our listeners call in, and he said he wanted to know how much 7 pounds of cheese would cost.
700.
700 pounds.
700.
Sorry.
One
How
block
much,
of cheese.
Yeah, so one block of cheese that you have in 700-pound blocks, how much would that cost, he wanted to know.
Right, but just to give a ballpark number, cheese is typically somewhere around $2 a pound.
Oof.
There
So,
you go.
there- all right.
$1,400 for an old block of cheese.
Wow.
Try and fit
Not
that on a
enough.
cracker.
I'm gonna need to write a big check.
Right. And Lloyd, okay, you know, we focus with weather around here is very important. And how would a drought conditions affect the cheese industry? How would it affect you specifically?
Well, it's sure going to affect the farmers that produce milk for us, because obviously corn silage is a very important feed component that they're going to have. So if you have drought impacts, you're going to impact that corn silage and the quality of that corn silage. Generally, you won't have big impacts on milk composition from that, though, but the costs of production are sure going to change when you have a drought.
Okay.
If we have really high heat, Depending on the farming practices, that can have an impact on milk composition. Cows do not like excessive heat. But most modern dairies now have a system of really good ventilation. They call them cross flow ventilated barns. And they move enough air across the barn that the cows stay cool, and really have minimal impact on milk composition now compared to, say, 10 to 15 years ago. In the middle of July, when it get really hot, we would see a pretty big impact on our milk composition, which would affect the amount of cheese that we're able to produce.
I see. And Lloyd, I got a couple of email questions here from a couple of listeners. They wanted to know, do you ever bring in goat milk for cheese?
No, we don't at Valley Queen. I did get involved in that once in a while when I was at South Dakota State, but not at Valley Queen.
I see. And then one other one that just came in. They're wondering if you need any tasters at your plant.
Believe it or not, we do have a group that tastes every vat, or a sample of cheese from every vat that we make. It's really an important part of our daily production evaluation, is to look at the cheese that we produce and make sure it has the flavor profile and characteristics that we're after. So we literally do grade every vat of cheese that we produce. So with the right
raising
training,
my
yes,
hand
we
right
do
here,
have those
Lloyd,
positions
right here.
open.
Nice. I'll take that. Okay. So Lloyd, you mentioned we were talking about silage in a ration for dairy cows. Do you feel like there's a difference in the diet for a dairy cow that's going to go send their milk in for cheese production versus drinking milk production? Any difference at all?
Probably not typically. Oftentimes the milk is pooled and may go to different, whether it goes to fluid or cheese. In our region of the state, there just is not a lot of people, so there's not much fluid production, and virtually all of the milk produced ends up for cheese manufacture.
Wow. So because we aren't really math geniuses here on this show, although occasionally we make Justin do it for us, just the amount of trucks that come in with your milk needs, how many trucks are you unloading a day, and how fast are you unloading trucks at your plant?
So we unload a little bit more than 100 trucks, about 100 to 125 trucks of liquid milk are going to come in every day. And then we're going to have like 13 semi-loads of cheese that are going to have to leave every day as well. But we also have all kinds of materials that need to show up at the plant and that kind of stuff. So we end up with a lot of trucks coming through Millbank on a daily basis. And we run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all the time. So
that brings
cows
up,
don't stop milking.
No, they don't. Now that brings up another question that just popped up with the trucker shortage that was kind of going on and kind of is a little bit now even. How has that affected your guys' operation, or have you guys been kind of okay? Do you hire your own trucks, or are these kind of like a third party that get brought in?
We're a really unique dairy manufacturer in that we hire all our own truckers and own all our own trucks as far as hauling the liquid milk. So we had to offer, it was hard to get people the last few years just because of the way the trucking industry has been. We do have a huge advantage, though, of being able to have daily runs. So our truckers get to come home every night and spend their evening with their family, which is nice to have. So we have a lot of long-term drivers that have been a part of Valley Queen. And again, go back to, we're a privately held company. We pay our drivers very well, and we have a profit sharing program for all our employees that are an important part of retaining our people and, attracting the best available people we can.
So what about blizzard conditions? If you're on a planned route and you can't get through, there's a certain amount of on-farm storage. Do you bring on extra trucks or run longer routes in order to try to work around that problem to get that perishable item in as fast as you can? And what's kind of that process look like for you as we get closer to these winter months, Lloyd?
It is a logistical nightmare. I wouldn't want to be our procurement manager. His name is Evan Grong, and he just does a phenomenal job. So we do have this 90-mile radius about the plant, and typically weather patterns aren't going to cover that whole area. So oftentimes, even when it's bad, we can still get milk into the plant, maybe from a different direction. We have limited on-site storage capacity, and obviously very limited on-farm capacity. And in fact, in a pretty significant portion of our farms, we direct load right onto the tanker truck. They don't store it there. So it is a logistical nightmare, and we don't shut down. We have a phenomenal maintenance department that has to keep things moving as well, because just to give an example, so we process 5 million pounds of milk a day. We can't hold even half of that on site. So we have to constantly be getting milk in for the plant to continue to run.
You know, that kind of leads into another point. And again, for those joining us, we're speaking with Lloyd Metzger from Valley Queen Cheese Factory down in South Dakota. If you'd like to join in on the conversation, ask a question, 701-293-9000 is our studio lines. What happens if you have too much or not enough milk that comes in on that day? Let's say that there is a storm system and transportation just isn't ideal for the southern half of your guys' 90-mile radius. What happens when you're short or you have too much?
So when we're short, we have no choice but to stop the plant. And we obviously would prefer not to, because we have signed contracts with customers to deliver a certain amount of cheese. So we really want to stay on our production schedule. And then that milk is going to eventually get here anyway, and you're going to have to process it. Now, if we have too much milk, you can try to sell it on the open market, but the big risk with milk is it's perishable. So the value you get out of that milk can diminish very quickly if you aren't able to sell it right away.
So, Lloyd, can you give me an idea of the size of dairy farms that you're working with? What's one of your smaller farms versus one of your larger farms per head of operation, to see, kind of what the supply is for all the cows that are bringing milk to you?
Wide range. Will go all the way from our smallest producers would be in that 100 to 200 cow range, all the way up to producers that have over 6,000 cows at one location.
Wow, that's a lot of cows.
Sure is.
Oh, this has been so
In
fabulous.
total, we process milk from about 82,000 cows a day.
It's a lot of cows. And now I don't
am
know
just
if
blown away.
So am I, Bridget. I don't know if this kind of goes if we asked this already or not. But is there like a special diet that goes with these cows for, milk production versus cheese production, or is it all kind of the same? Are there like guidelines that you like to give your providers to follow, so that way it's kind of on the same standard for the milk that you're using as a whole?
Yeah, so we don't tell our processors how to feed their cows. They're really good at that. But what we do is give incentives for the composition of that milk. So we want milk that has fat and protein in it, because when you make cheese, it's a concentration process. I kind of alluded to it before. And in that concentration process, you're capturing the fat and protein that were in that starting milk. So the more fat and protein you start with, the more cheese you're going to get. So when we pay our producers, we pay them based on how much cheese we're going to get from their milk. So each individual producer gets a different price for their milk based on how much cheese we can make from that milk. Just makes it very fair.
Interesting.
Gives incentives for them to breed their cattle and feed them to maximize the amount of cheese that can be produced from that milk. So it's a nice feedback loop that we have. And, it makes us happy because we can make lots of cheese. It makes our producers happy because they can do selection and feeding that will maximize the amount of fat and protein that they can produce and the revenue that they're going to bring back to the farm.
Wow. That just seems like a very fair way of doing it.
Well, again, 93-year-old privately held company, profit sharing with our employees. We treat our farmers well because we want them to stay in business. We want lots of cows close to the plant because, again, to be sustainable, you don't want to haul that water any farther than you have to, and you want to be as efficient as you possibly can be throughout that whole production facility. And again, we want them to make more fat and protein in their milk because that allows us to produce more cheese from every pound of milk we take into the plant.
All right, I got one last question for you, Lloyd. This is another email one. They wanted to know if you do any tours of your factory.
We don't to the general public. If you're an employee, or then your family can do some evening employee tours. But just with the food safety requirements we have, and the protocols we have to follow, we just can't open the facility up to the general public.
I see. Well, Lloyd, go ahead, Bridget.
There goes me being Lloyd's cousin. Sorry.
Oh, well, Lloyd, we really appreciate you coming on with Weather and Ag in Focus today. If people out there are interested or they want to get more information about your operation, is there anywhere that you would like to share where they could get that information or follow kind of what your company does?
Yeah, we got Valley Queen has a Facebook page and obviously has a website as well that's easy to find. And I alluded to, we are in the middle of planning an expansion. We currently have over 300 employees, but we'll have to hire 125 employees in the next 2 years for our expansion. So a great company to work for as well. If you're looking for a job, we have a lot of them available.
Bridget, you're not allowed to take that job. I know how much you want to see and taste the cheese, but we need you here.
Dairy farmer's daughter. Never stop loving cheese right here.
Well, Lloyd, we hope you have a great rest of the day. And when we come back with Weather and Ag in Focus, we'll take another look at that forecast. We still got a couple ag topics to get to